The art of deliberate invisibility. A philosophy of modern solitude. Picture this. In a coffee shop filled with dozens of people, each absorbed in their glowing screens, a profound silence reigns. They are physically together, yet existentially alone. Now imagine someone choosing this isolation deliberately, not as escape from loneliness, but as a conscious rejection of the noise that masquerades as connection. This person has discovered what the ancients knew, but we have forgotten: that solitude is not the absence of company, but the presence of oneself. In our hyperconnected age, the idea of choosing solitude seems almost revolutionary. We live in a culture that equates visibility with value, where social media metrics determine worth, and where being alone is pathologized as depression or antisocial behavior. Yet there exists a quietly persistent philosophy that challenges this assumption, one that suggests our greatest insights come not from the crowd, but from the courage to step away from it. Why would anyone voluntarily become invisible in a world that demands constant performance? What drives a person to reject the very social fabric that defines human existence? These questions have haunted philosophers, mystics, and ordinary individuals for millennia, yet they feel more pressing today than ever before. The hermit tradition offers us a lens through which to examine not just solitude, but the nature of authentic living itself. It asks us to consider whether true freedom might lie not in joining the world, but in consciously choosing to leave it behind. The impulse toward deliberate solitude is as old as civilization itself. In ancient China, Zhuangzi spoke of the sage who wanders alone with the spirit of the universe. The Buddhist tradition gave us forest monks who sought enlightenment in radical isolation. Medieval Christian mystics retreated to caves and cells, believing that proximity to God required distance from humanity. But perhaps no figure embodies this philosophy more powerfully than Diogenes of Sinope, the ancient Greek cynic who rejected social conventions so completely that he lived in a barrel. When Alexander the Great found him sunbathing and offered to grant any wish, Diogenes simply asked the most powerful man in the world to stop blocking his sunlight. Here was someone who had discovered that the ultimate luxury was not power over others, but freedom from needing anything they could offer. These weren't merely eccentric individuals. They were philosophers of refusal, pioneers of a different way of being human. They understood something we struggle to grasp: that society's offerings often come with invisible chains, and that true autonomy sometimes requires radical non-participation. Modern psychology has given us terms like introversion and social anxiety, but these clinical categories miss something essential about the deliberate choosers of solitude. The philosophical hermit is not someone who fears human contact, but someone who has calculated its cost and found it wanting. Consider the Stoic concept of ataraxia, tranquility of mind achieved through emotional detachment. The hermit takes this further, achieving not just emotional but physical distance from the sources of disturbance. In a world of manufactured outrage, constant notifications, and performative relationships, this distance becomes not withdrawal but wisdom. Simone Weil, the 20th century philosopher and mystic, captured this when she wrote about decreation, the process of emptying oneself of ego and social identity to make space for authentic experience. The hermit practices decreation at a societal level, becoming nobody in order to become somebody real. Walk through any modern city and observe the frantic pace, the stressed faces, the constant checking of phones. We have created a civilization based on artificial urgency. Everything demands immediate attention, instant response, perpetual engagement. The hermit sees through this illusion. In our attention economy, human consciousness has become the raw material for corporate profit. Every notification, every breaking news alert, every social media update is designed to capture and monetize our mental bandwidth. The hermit recognizes this as a form of spiritual robbery and opts out entirely. This isn't mere Luddism. It's a philosophical position about the nature of consciousness and freedom. The hermit understands that in a world designed to scatter attention, the ability to focus becomes revolutionary. In a culture of shallow connection, depth requires deliberate isolation. What do hermits find in solitude that the rest of us miss? First, they discover what the mystics called interior silence, not merely the absence of noise, but a quality of inner stillness that allows subtle perceptions to emerge. In this silence, they report experiences that our noisy world makes impossible. The ability to think original thoughts, to feel authentic emotions, to perceive the world without the mediation of others' opinions. There is also what we might call temporal sovereignty, the radical freedom to live according to natural rhythms rather than social schedules. The hermit wakes when rested, eats when hungry, works when inspired. This isn't laziness, but a return to organic time, the kind our ancestors knew before clocks colonized consciousness. Perhaps most importantly, hermits develop what Hannah Arendt called the space of appearance, but inverted. Instead of appearing before others to establish identity, they disappear from others to discover who they are beneath the roles, expectations, and performances that society demands. Today's hermits don't necessarily live in caves or forest huts. They might be your neighbor who works remotely, shops online, and has mastered the art of beneficial invisibility in plain sight. The internet has created possibilities for solitude that previous generations couldn't imagine. You can earn a living, access knowledge, and even maintain selective human contact without ever leaving your chosen sanctuary. This connected hermit represents a new evolution in the philosophy of withdrawal. They've discovered that physical presence in society is often optional, that most social obligations are arbitrary, and that the city can provide a kind of anonymity that rivals the deepest wilderness. Consider the phenomenon of ghost restaurants, businesses that exist only for delivery, with no physical storefront for customers. The modern hermit operates similarly, economically present but socially invisible, participating in society's systems while avoiding its social demands. Yet this philosophy comes with genuine costs that honest advocates must acknowledge. The hermit trades the warmth of belonging for the clarity of independence. They sacrifice the support of community for the sovereignty of solitude. Not everyone is psychologically equipped for this trade-off. There's also the question of responsibility. If the most thoughtful individuals withdraw from society, who remains to guide it toward wisdom? The hermit might achieve personal peace while leaving others to struggle with the chaos they've escaped. Some hermits become bitter, their solitude curdling into resentment. They watch the world from the outside and judge it harshly, forgetting their own complicity in its problems. The line between philosophical withdrawal and misanthropic rejection can blur dangerously. Perhaps the answer lies not in total withdrawal, but in what we might call strategic solitude, the ability to step in and out of social engagement consciously rather than being carried along by its current. This requires developing what the hermits knew, the capacity to be alone without being lonely, to think independently without becoming isolated, to engage selectively without losing one's center. In practical terms, this might mean regular periods of digital fasting, choosing quality over quantity in relationships, or creating physical and psychological spaces that belong entirely to you. It means learning to say no not from fear or antisocial impulses, but from a clear sense of your own priorities and limitations. The strategic hermit doesn't hate humanity. They love it enough to preserve something valuable about human consciousness, the constant. Socialization tends to erode the capacity for deep thought, authentic feeling, and original perception. In a culture that confuses visibility with significance, the hermit's greatest gift might be reminding us that some things can only be discovered in hiddenness. Not everything valuable needs to be shared, documented, or performed for others. Sometimes, the most radical act is simply to step outside the theater and remember that you are not your role. The hermit's path is not for everyone, nor should it be. but their existence poses questions that benefit us all. What would you do if no one were watching? Who are you when you're not performing for others? What thoughts arise in silence that never emerge in conversation? These are not merely personal questions, but philosophical challenges to our entire way of living. In choosing invisibility, the hermit becomes, paradoxically, one of the most visible critics of our visible age. They remind us that in a world of endless connection, the most precious thing might be the courage to disconnect, not from life, but from the illusions that prevent us from living it authentically. The hermit's final teaching is perhaps this: that you do not need to escape to a mountain cave to practice their philosophy. You need only to recognize that in every moment, you have the choice between automatic participation and conscious selection, between reactive engagement and deliberate withdrawal, between being carried by the crowd and walking your own path, especially if you walk it alone. Asterisk. In the end, the hermit's greatest wisdom may be knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to be visible and when to practice the radical art of deliberate invisibility. In a world that has forgotten how to be alone, they preserve something essential about what it means to be human. Asterisk.